Margaret, it's time to stop embarrassing yourself. That is what my mother said to me at my own kitchen table on a Tuesday evening in October, 3 years before the ceremony at the county library. She had driven 40 minutes to say it in person, which I understood meant she had been building up to it for longer than that. I want you to hold that sentence for a moment. Not because it was the worst thing she ever said, it wasn't, but because of the word embarrassing. Not you're failing, not this isn't working, not I'm worried about you. Embarrassing. The word of a woman whose primary concern was not my welfare, but how my choices reflected on the family at dinner parties and church, and the country club, where she and my father had maintained a membership for 30 years. I want to tell you what she said a beat later, but I'm going to make you wait for it. Because the part that matters isn't what she said in my kitchen. It's what she saw, 3 years after, standing in the front row of the Millhaven County Public Library with my sister Dana and my father and my Aunt Carol and the rest of them, when the executive director of the Aldrich Family Foundation stepped to the microphone and read aloud the name on the check. My name. None of them saw that coming. Including, if I'm honest, me. Welcome back. This is a place for quiet stories about ordinary people who build something real in the years their families spend telling them to stop. If you have ever been called embarrassing by someone who should have been proud of you, this one is for you. Stay with me. The library ceremony is at the end. The beginning is a folding table in the basement of St. Mark's Episcopal on a Thursday evening in October, 14 years ago, with a blue spiral notebook and $43. Subscribe, drop a comment. Let's go back. My name is Meg Calloway, and I grew up in Millhaven, Ohio, in a family that understood success through a very specific set of coordinates. A certain kind of job, a certain kind of address, a certain kind of car in the driveway, and the opinion of a certain kind of person at a certain kind of gathering. My father, Gerald, had built a regional accounting firm that was well regarded in the county and paid for the house on Sycamore Ridge and the club membership, and two daughters who were expected to continue in the upward direction. My mother, Constance, managed the social calendar with the precision of a general and the warmth of a hostess, and the unwavering belief that a family's reputation was its most valuable and most fragile asset. My sister Dana understood this instinctively. She is 4 years older than me, and she had what I used to think of, privately, as the gift of legibility. Her choices were always easy to explain, and they always landed in the right direction. Finance degree, corporate job in Columbus, husband who worked in commercial real estate, a house in Dublin that photographed well for Christmas cards. She was not unkind to me. She was simply a person who had found the right lane on the first try and could not fully understand why anyone would choose a different road. Then there was me. I was a social work graduate student at 22 when I first understood what I wanted to do. I was doing a field placement with a summer learning program for low-income children in Millhaven, and on the last day of the program, a 7-year-old girl named Amara handed me a drawing she had made of herself reading a book. In the drawing, the book was bigger than she was. She had drawn it that way on purpose, she told me, because the book was the most important thing. I drove home with that drawing on my passenger seat, and I sat in my apartment for 2 hours thinking about what it would take to build something permanent, something that did not disappear at the end of August and leave 200 children with nothing until the following June. Something that stayed. I did not have resources. I did not have connections, at least not the right kind. What I had was a graduate degree, a social work license, and a conviction that I could not continue in my life without trying. The Harbor Project began in the basement of St. Mark's Episcopal on a Thursday evening in October, 14 years ago. I had negotiated use of the space in exchange for helping the church's food pantry twice a month. I had a folding table and 4 folding chairs, and a box of donated books from a library sale, and a blue spiral notebook in which I intended to record every dollar that came in and every child we served. 7 children came the first week. Their parents had heard about it through the school counselor, who was the first person outside my graduate program to take the idea seriously. Her name was Helen, and she made 8 phone calls on a Wednesday afternoon and followed up on each one, and 7 children showed up on Thursday, and she came with them to make sure they arrived safely, and then sat against the wall the whole evening without interjecting, giving the space over to me and the children completely. That was a gift I have thought about many times since. The specific generosity of someone who has influence and chooses to put it at your service without keeping any credit for themselves. I sent Helen a note after the ceremony. I told her I still thought about those 8 phone calls. She wrote back and said she remembered every child she had called that week by name and where they had ended up. That is what 20 years of school counseling gives you, a precise memory for which interventions mattered. The notebook was from the dollar section at the office supply store. It was spiral-bound and blue, the cheap kind with a cardstock cover and college-ruled pages. I wrote the date at the top of the first page, then the name of each child, then the name of their school, then their grade. Below that, a column for donations received. The first entry read, Tuesday collection plate, St. Mark's, $43. That notebook is still in my desk drawer. It is the first of 11 of them. By the time of the library ceremony, the column for donations received ran to 1,200 individual entries across all 11 books, from the $5 checks in year 1 to the pledge cards from the later years when things had changed. I am getting ahead of myself. The first 3 years of the Harbor Project were, by almost any conventional measure, small. We were not failing, we were serving children, in real ways, and the outcomes were measurable. But we were small in the way that most things are small at the beginning, before compounding does its work. The budget in year 1 was $12,000, most of it from church collections, and a local business grant I had written myself at midnight on a Tuesday. In year 2, it was $31,000. In year 3, $58,000, the first year we could afford to pay a part-time coordinator other than me. I was working a second job those years to support myself while I built the Harbor Project on a stipend that was not enough to live on. I tutored high school students on evenings and weekends. I ate very simply. I drove a car that was older than my graduate degree and made a specific sound when I accelerated that I had learned to accept as its personality. I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Millhaven with a friend from graduate school who was also doing nonprofit work, which meant our apartment had 2 laptops open on every evening and a shared understanding that we were both going to be broke for a while, and that was the bargain we had made. I did not find that life difficult, exactly. I found it specific. It required clarity about what mattered, which I had, and it required patience, which I was developing, and it required the ability to hold the long view when the short view was uninspiring, which is a skill that does not come naturally to anyone but can be learned through practice. My family was aware of the Harbor Project in the abstract way that families are aware of things they have not paid sustained attention to. My mother knew it existed. She mentioned it at family dinners occasionally, in the way you mention a relative's hobby, with a certain fond indulgence that communicated, if you were listening, that she did not expect it to amount to anything. My father was kinder. He had a small businessman's respect for the attempt, even if the nonprofit structure confused him slightly. He asked questions at Thanksgiving, how many kids now, what's the reading improvement rate, and listened to the answers with the focused attention of a man who understood that numbers meant something. He had given the Harbor Project a check for $500 in year 1, the first significant individual gift we received, and I had recorded it in the blue notebook with the care I gave every entry. He told me once, driving me to the airport after Christmas, that he thought what I was doing mattered. He said it quietly, looking at the road, in the way of a man who was not practiced at saying this kind of thing. He said, I don't understand all of it, but I think it matters. I said I knew he thought so. He said, your mother worries, she's not wrong to worry, but worrying and believing are different things, and I want you to know I believe in it. That was the most he had ever said to me directly about the work. I thought about it for a long time on the flight home. Dana was the most honest of them, which is not the same as the kindest. She said twice, in different conversations, Meg, when are you going to do something with your degree? Something with a real career track. The implication was that what I was doing was not something. It was temporary or exploratory or a phase, and the actual life was scheduled to begin once I had come to my senses. I said, both times, that this was what I was doing with my degree. She said, "I just want you to be stable." I understood that she meant well by her definition of well, which was a financial definition, a security definition, the definition of a woman who had chosen a road with clear signage and could not understand why someone would choose the one without it. I did not argue. I went home and I opened the notebook. What I wrote that evening, after the second conversation with Dana, was this: Year 3, Month 9. 73 children served this year to date. Reading levels, 68% showing measurable improvement. Budget gap, $4,200. Outstanding pledges, $2,800. Note, staying on this, that was not a note to myself. It was a note to the work. I had started doing this without planning to, turning toward the notebook after difficult conversations, the way some people turn toward a window, to look at what was real, to not let the static of other people's doubt overwrite the frequency of the thing I was actually doing. I want to stop here for a moment, because I know some of you are listening to this, and you know this particular feeling exactly. The feeling of doing the work that is yours to do while the people who love you look at it and see the wrong thing. If that is you, leave one word below. I will know what it means. Subscribe and stay with me. Dorothy Reese came to the Harbor Project in year 2. She was 71 then, recently retired from 38 years of teaching second grade at Millhaven Elementary, and she had heard about what I was doing from the school counselor, the same woman who had sent me the first 7 children. She showed up at the basement at St. Mark's on a Thursday evening with a bag of reading supplies and a list of the children in the neighborhood who she knew needed help. She did not ask if she could volunteer. She sat down at one of the folding tables and began working with a child on letter sounds, with the ease of a woman who has done this 10,000 times. Afterward, she found me and said, "You need more books and a better space. I'll work on both." She did. Dorothy Reese is the reason the Harbor Project has a library today, because she spent the next 3 years writing grant applications for book donations, with a persistence that the book publishers she wrote to later told me was unprecedented in their correspondence. She brought 7 other retired teachers with her in year 3. She organized the first fundraising dinner, held in the church fellowship hall with mismatched tablecloths, and a menu she cooked herself, which raised $4,200, and which she declared a rousing success with the matter-of-fact enthusiasm she brought to things she had organized, and that had gone as planned. She also sat across from me at my kitchen table more times than I can count over those years, with coffee between us and the notebooks open, and she told me the truth the way people tell the truth when they believe in what they're looking at. She said, "This is going to be something real. Not yet, but it is going to be." She said it without sentimentality. She said it the way she had told children for 38 years that they were going to be readers, not as a wish, but as a fact she was determined to help them arrive at. I did not know how to receive that kind of certainty at first. I had been operating for 3 years in a climate of measured support and polite skepticism, and Dorothy's flat confidence took some adjustment. I learned to receive it by being in the room with it long enough. There was a night in year 3, February, the low point of the funding cycle, the month when the church collection plates ran thin and the grant payments had not yet come, and the gap in the operating budget was $6,200. When I sat at my kitchen table after the children had gone home, and I looked at the notebook, and I could not find, that night, what I usually found when I opened it. The names and numbers that usually settled me were just numbers, just names, and I was tired in the specific way that comes from years of effort sustained on less than enough. I called Dorothy. She answered at 9:30 at night without complaint. I said I was not sure I could keep doing this. She said, "Yes, you can." I said it wasn't that simple. She said, "I didn't say it was simple, I said you can do it." She said, "The children you served this year improved their reading levels at a rate of 73%. I know that because I helped measure it. 73% of children who came to you behind grade level moved forward. You did that. Now go to sleep and do it again tomorrow." I went to sleep. I did it again the following day. That phone call is the one I think about when people ask me how I kept going. Dorothy is the answer. Not because she solved anything. She could not solve the funding gap, or the low salary years, or the family conversations, where I was the relative with the charity that wasn't going anywhere. She could not solve any of that. But she was the person who kept the picture accurate when everyone else was working from the wrong version. Dorothy became the first board member of the Harbor Project when we incorporated as a nonprofit in year 3. She signed the papers the way she signed everything, carefully, with a fountain pen, and then she looked up and said, "Now it's real on paper." It was already real before. She was 74 at the time of the library ceremony. She is the person I looked at first when they read the number. Her face did what I had never seen her face do before, which was absolutely nothing. No surprise, no triumph, just the settled expression of a woman for whom this was the predicted outcome. She had predicted it. She had been saying so for 12 years. I am not my mother by blood. She is not my mother by blood. She is something that does not have a clean word, in the same way that the most important relationships rarely do. What I know is that she showed up when the picture was small and stayed when it got larger, and believed the whole time it would be exactly what it became. The zoning fight happened in year 5, and I want to tell you about it because it is the part of the story that nearly ended it, and also the part that changed what the Harbor Project became. We had been offered a space at a reduced commercial rate, an empty storefront on the main street of Millhaven, the old hardware store that had been vacant for 3 years. The space was large enough to run our full program year-round. Instead of the seasonal and weekend cramped schedule we had been running in borrowed church basements and school classrooms. It would have allowed us to hire full-time staff and stabilize the program in ways that the patchwork of spaces never could. The City Council denied the zoning variance we needed to operate a youth program in the commercial district. The vote was 4-3. The no votes came from council members who had received letters from a handful of property owners on the main street who worried, in language I will be careful about here, about the kind of families who would be coming and going. I understood what kind meant. I had been doing this work long enough to understand what kind meant. I went home and I sat with it for 2 days. Then I organized. I do not want to make that sound simple because it was not simple. It meant 6 months of community meetings, phone calls, a letter-writing campaign that Dorothy coordinated with the same energy she brought to book grant applications, and 3 appearances before the City Council at which I presented the program's outcomes data in clear, specific terms and brought, each time, parents and children and teachers who said in their own words what the Harbor Project had meant to their families. The first appearance, we had 12 people. The council listened politely and said nothing new. The second, we had 28 people. A parent named Rosalind stood up and described, for 4 minutes, without notes, the change she had seen in her son's relationship with reading over 8 months of attending the Harbor Project. She was steady and precise, and she did not perform emotion. The council received it with the slightly uncomfortable attention of people who have been shown something they were not expecting. The third appearance, 41 people. Dorothy brought her 7 retired teachers, all of them in good coats, all of them carrying written statements that they read aloud in turn, with the patient authority of people who have spent their careers teaching the children of this community, and are not going to be told those children do not belong on Main Street. The fourth appearance, we had standing room only in the council chambers. 63 people came on a Tuesday evening. The vote reversed 6-1. I want to tell you what happened the morning after the reversal because it is important to this story. My mother called. She had been following the zoning fight. I had not told her about it, but Millhaven is not a large city and people talk. She called at 7:30 in the morning before I had coffee and she said, "I heard the council voted." I said yes. She said, "Well, I suppose that's good for those children." I said it was. She said, "I just hope it doesn't cause problems for the property values on Main Street." I held the phone away from my ear for a moment and looked at the ceiling of my kitchen. Then I said, "Thanks for calling, Mom." And I poured my coffee. That was not the worst thing she said to me. This was, 3 months later, at the kitchen table, the evening she drove 40 minutes specifically to deliver the sentence I opened this story with. She said, "Margaret, it's time to stop embarrassing yourself." She had come, she said, because Dana had mentioned that I was planning to take out a personal loan to cover a gap in the operating budget, which was true, though I had not told her and would have preferred she not know. She said she had been talking to her friend Louise, whose son ran a real nonprofit. She said real with a specific intonation, in Columbus, and that my situation was clearly not sustainable and I needed to think about winding down and finding a real job. Then she said the thing I have not told you yet. She said, "Louise's son has a position in his development office. I told her you might be interested." She said this with the particular satisfaction of a woman who had solved a problem she had not been asked to solve. "He helps children too, real children with a real budget. You could do good work there. Better work than," she waved her hand at the general concept of my kitchen, "this." I sat across from her at my own table, and I understood, with the clean clarity that comes after years of being misread, exactly what was happening. She was not trying to hurt me. She was trying, in the way she knew how, to fix what she had decided was broken. She could not see what was there because she had never looked closely enough to see it. I said, "I'm not winding down." She said, "Margaret." I said, "I'm not winding down. I appreciate that you're concerned. But I'm going to keep going, and I need you to decide whether you're going to support that or not, because I don't have space in my life for the version of you that comes to my kitchen to tell me to stop." She stood up, she put on her coat, she said, "I just hope you know what you're doing." I said, "I do." She left. We did not speak for 6 weeks. I went to my desk. I opened the blue notebook. I found the entry from year one, the $43 from the collection plate, and I read the names in the column beside it. 7 children, their ages and schools. Then I turned to the current page and I read those names too. The list was longer than it had been. It was going to be longer still. I was not stopping. The Aldrich Family Foundation came to us in year 7 through a route I had not planned. A woman named Carol Aldrich had a granddaughter in the Millhaven School District, a third grader who had been struggling with reading and who had been attending the Harbor Project's after-school program for 8 months. The granddaughter went home one evening and told her grandmother, very specifically, what had changed for her that year. She said she used to think books were too hard. She said now she thought they were like a secret language she had been learning, and she was getting good at it. Carol Aldrich was 81 years old, the matriarch of a family foundation that had been making grants in education for 40 years. She called our office the following Monday. She asked to speak to the executive director. I answered my own phone. She said she would like to come see the program. I said she was welcome any time. She came the following Thursday, alone, without a foundation representative or a site visit checklist, and she sat in the back of the main tutoring room for 90 minutes and watched the children and the volunteers work. She asked the children questions. They answered her directly, the way children answer adults who sit at their level and look them in the eye. When she left, she stood in the entryway and looked at the framed list of names on the wall, the names of every child the Harbor Project had served, organized by year, 8 years of them, and she said, "How many?" I said 612. She said, "By next year." I said we were projecting 750. She nodded, the way a person nods when a number confirms what they already understood. She said, "I'll have someone from the foundation call you." I shook her hand. She left. I went back to my office and I sat down and I stayed very still for approximately 3 minutes, the way I sometimes needed to after something significant, and then I opened my laptop and went back to work. The foundation call came on a Thursday in March. The process that followed was rigorous and careful and took 14 months. I want to say that clearly because the word transformational gets used about grants in ways that make it sound like something that simply happens, and this one did not simply happen. It required a site visit from 3 foundation officers, a detailed proposal of 97 pages that I largely wrote myself over 4 months, financial audits for 7 years of operation, and a conversation with the Foundation's Education Committee that lasted 2.5 hours, and which I left not knowing the outcome. The proposal took most of those 4 months. I worked on it in the evenings after the program closed, at my desk in the Harbor Project's Main Street office, with the city quiet outside and the list of children's names on the wall behind me, all 847 of them by that point. I wrote the narrative sections first, the history of the organization, the theory of change, the outcomes data, and they came out of me with a fluency that surprised me, because I had been living with this material for 8 years and knew it the way you know your own address. The budget sections I did with a spreadsheet and the same methodical precision I had brought to every financial document since the Blue Notebook. Dorothy came to the office 3 evenings a week during the writing period. She sat across the desk from me and read drafts, and marked them with the red pen she had used for 38 years of grading student work, and she did not spare me the corrections. She circled paragraphs that were unclear. She wrote too long in the margins of sections that lost the thread. She flagged numbers that did not match the audit figures and sent me back to reconcile them before proceeding. She was exacting and patient in equal measure, the way she was with everything she cared about. At one point I said, "Dorothy, this proposal is about running the organization. You've already done more than you need to." She said, "If a proposal this important goes out with a grammar error, I will not be able to live with that. Keep going." I kept going. The Education Committee conversation, 2.5 hours in the Foundation's conference room in Columbus, was the one I was least sure of. I had presented the data and the expansion plan and the outcomes model, and then the committee asked questions for 90 minutes, detailed, probing questions about sustainability and leadership succession and partnership models, and the methodology behind our reading assessment. And I answered all of them as precisely as I could, and when I left the building I stood on the sidewalk outside and did not know what they had decided and understood. I would not know for weeks. I called Dorothy from the sidewalk. She said, "How did you feel in there?" I said, "Honest, I felt like I said the truth about everything." She said, "Then you did your job. The rest is theirs." During those 14 months, I did not tell my family what was happening. I did not tell most of my board. I told Dorothy. Dorothy said, "Of course," the way she said things when the outcome was already clear to her. She said, "Get me the proposal draft by Friday." She edited it with a red pen and a relentlessness that I would have found difficult to bear from anyone whose judgment I trusted less. The call came on a Monday morning in September. The Foundation's executive director, a man named James Holloway, told me the board had approved a 10-year grant in the amount of $50 million to be paid in annual installments to fund an expansion of the Harbor Project's programming to 3 additional counties. I wrote the number in the notebook. I wrote the date beside it. I sat with it for a moment and then I called Dorothy. She answered on the second ring. I said the number. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I told you." I said, "You told me." She said, "When is the ceremony?" I invited my family to the library ceremony. This was a decision I made deliberately, after thinking about it for 3 days, and I want to be honest about what I was thinking and what I was not. I was not thinking about vindication. I was not planning a moment where they would have to reckon with being wrong. Those things are satisfying in a theoretical way, but they are not, in my experience, what actually matters, or what actually changes anything. What I was thinking was something simpler. I had built something real over 14 years, and I wanted the people who were supposed to be proud of me to be in the room when it was named out loud. That is a different thing. It required me to be willing to be in the room with them, and to let whatever happened happen, which is harder than engineering a vindication. I called my mother. I said there was an event at the county library the following month, and I would like the family to come. I told her what it was, a grant announcement ceremony for the Harbor Project. I did not tell her the number. She said, "Of course, we'll all come." She said it with the warmth she was capable of, and I received it as warmth. The morning of the ceremony, my mother found me in the library meeting room an hour before the event, when I was going over the program with Dorothy and James Holloway from the foundation. The family was not scheduled to arrive for another 40 minutes. She had come early, which she never did for anything, which meant she had wanted to catch me alone. She found me in the hallway outside the meeting room. She said, "I want to tell you something before this starts." I waited, she said. "I've told people about the harbor project for years." I looked at her, she said, "My friends, the people at the club, anyone who asked what my daughters were doing. I always told them about Dana's work and then I told them about yours." She paused. "I know I wasn't always, I know I said things that weren't," she stopped. She said, "I'm proud of you, Margaret." She said it plainly, without performance. That is the thing about my mother that is the hardest to hold. She is capable of this. She has always been capable of this. She simply could not access it consistently, or publicly, or in the moments when I needed it most. I said, "Thank you, Mom." She said, "I should have said it sooner." I said, "Yes." She put her hand on my arm for a moment. Then she went back toward the main room to find my father and Dana. That was the humanizing thing, the incomplete thing, the real thing. Not an apology, not a reckoning, not the full accounting for 14 years of kitchen table discouragement and carefully managed expectations. Just, "I'm proud of you," said privately, before a room full of people would make it necessary to say it publicly. I am not finished with what she and I are to each other. I have accepted that we may never fully close the gap between the thing she gave me and the thing I needed. But I received that morning conversation for what it was. A woman doing her imperfect best to cross a distance she had created. And I moved it to the drawer where I keep real things, and I went back into the meeting room to finish preparing. The ceremony was at 2 o'clock. The Millhaven County Public Library has a community room that holds 200 people, and it was full. Parents of children served, current and former volunteers, teachers and school counselors and local officials, and the foundation representatives and members of the press. The 8 years of names on the wall, my framed list of 847 children, printed and mounted, had been moved from the Harbor Projects building and hung at the front of the room for the occasion. I stood at the podium and I spoke for 11 minutes. I did not use notes. I spoke about Amara and the drawing of the book Bigger Than Herself, which I had carried with me since that field placement 14 years ago, and which was framed on the wall of my office now. I spoke about Dorothy and the 7 retired teachers and the $43 collection plate entry in the first notebook. I spoke about the folding table at St. Mark's and the church basement and the borrowed classrooms and the zoning fight and the Main Street building and the 6 full-time staff members who now ran a program that had not existed 14 years ago. I spoke about what I had understood, the day Amara showed me her drawing, about why it mattered that something stayed. That the children who needed this program most were the ones whose summer would otherwise be empty, whose reading would slip, whose relationship to learning would narrow a little each year without intervention. That the work was not glamorous. That it was a Thursday evening, every Thursday evening, for 14 years, with the notebooks and the outcomes data and the coffee and the grant applications and the city council chambers and the red pen in the margins. I spoke about what a book meant to a child who had been told, by circumstance rather than by words, that books were not for her. That the secret language Amara's granddaughter had described was real, and it unlocked a world, and the Harbor Project's job was to hand out the keys. Then James Holloway from the Aldrich Foundation came to the podium, and he spoke about the foundation's values and about the process of their decision. He spoke about the proposal and the outcomes data and the extraordinary sustained quality of the work over 14 years. Then he held up the ceremonial check. The check was large, the oversized kind made for ceremonies, and it was made out to the Harbor Project, and in the lower left corner where donor checks say memo, it said transformational commitment, and in the upper left corner where checks say pay to the order of, it said the Harbor Project Executive Director, Margaret E. Calloway, my name, in the upper left corner of a $50 million check. James Holloway read it aloud. The room applauded, not the polite kind. The kind that comes from 200 people who have been watching a thing grow for years and understand what the number means for the people it will serve. Rosalind, the parent who had testified at the second council appearance, was 2 rows from the front. I saw her stand. Dorothy's 7 retired teachers, all of them still involved in the program in some capacity, were seated together near the center. They rose together the way they had stood together at the fourth council appearance, and that image is one I will carry for a long time. I was looking at Dorothy. She was in the front row, in the seat I had reserved for her, in the good blue cardigan she wore to important occasions. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her face had that absolute stillness. She caught my eye. She nodded once, that was all. I looked at my family. My mother was standing. She had begun to stand before the applause finished, which she had not done until she heard the number. And I saw the mathematics of the moment moving through her face. The number, and my name, and 14 years, and the conversation in the hallway, all of it processing in the particular way of a woman who has believed one thing for a long time and is in the process of revising it. She was looking at me with the expression of someone seeing clearly, maybe for the first time, the distance between the picture she had held and the thing that was actually there. My father was already standing. His face was uncomplicated. He was simply proud, the clean way that fathers are proud when something resolves in the right direction, and he was looking at me the way I had wanted him to look at me for 14 years. Dana had her hand over her mouth. I did not linger on them. I was not there for the moment of their recognition. I was there for the children on the wall and for Dorothy in her good blue cardigan, and for every dollar in every notebook, and for Amara's drawing, which I had looked at on the morning of the ceremony as I always did, to remember what the book meant, and why it was bigger than the girl. After the ceremony, my mother found me in the reception area. She said, "The Harbor Project." I said, "Yes." She said, 506 children this past year. I said, 847 total, 512 last year. She said the number back to me. She was committing it to memory. I watched her do this, and it moved me in the complicated way that late arrivals move you, with relief and with the ghost of all the years before the arriving. She said, "I want to know more about it, how it works, what the money does." I said, "Come visit. Come on a Thursday evening and see what we do." She came the following Thursday. She sat in the back of the tutoring room for 90 minutes, the same way Carol Aldrich had sat. She did not speak, she watched. When she left, she found me in the hallway. She said, "Those children." I said, "Yes." She said, "I didn't," she stopped. "I should have come years ago." I said, "Yes." She did not apologize exactly. But what she said next was as close as my mother has ever come to putting words to the distance between us and acknowledging who had built it. She said, "You were right to keep going. I was wrong to ask you to stop." I said, "Thank you." I meant it, not as a courtesy, as a real thank you, for a sentence I had wanted to hear for a long time and had stopped expecting and had received anyway, finally, on a Thursday evening in the hallway of the Harbor Project's permanent building on Main Street in Millhaven. The building she had worried about the property values of 3 years earlier, when the council vote reversed. The building that now had 847 names on its walls and 6 full-time staff, and a library full of books that Dorothy had spent 4 years writing letters to acquire. She looked at the wall of names as she put on her coat. She stood with it for a moment. Then she said, "Those are all real children." I said, "All of them." She nodded. She walked out to her car. She has come back 4 times since then, always on a Thursday, always sitting in the back without speaking, watching. She brings things sometimes, a box of pencils, a bag of granola bars for the children's snack table. She does not announce these contributions. She sets them on the supply table by the door and finds her seat. I think this is her way of doing what she knows how to do, which is provide, and of doing it in the context I have built rather than the one she would have preferred. I receive it as what it is, an imperfect arrival, a real one. Dana called the following week. She said she had been thinking about the ceremony. She said she had been thinking about things she had said over the years that she wished she had said differently. She said, "I didn't understand what you were doing. I want to understand it now." I talked to her for 45 minutes. She listened the whole time. She asked specific questions about the reading assessment methodology, about the partnership with the school district, about how we tracked outcomes over time. These were not social questions. She was trying to actually understand, which is different from trying to appear interested, and I received the difference. She has joined the Harbor Project's advisory circle, and she makes an annual gift in an amount that she told me she could actually afford. That is more than it sounds like, because it means she asked herself seriously what she could give and gave that, rather than giving what would look generous or what would make the conversation comfortable. She gave what was honest. That is not the relationship I might have built with her if the years had been different. It is the relationship we are building now, from where we actually are, which is the only place any relationship can actually begin. Here is what I know now, in year 14 of the Harbor Project, sitting at my desk on an October morning with the blue notebook open in front of me. The notebook is worn. The cover has bent and rebent so many times that it no longer lies flat. The first entry, St. Mark's collection plate, $43, $7 children, Tuesday, October, is still readable. I can still see the names of those 7 children in the column beside it. 2 of them are in college now. One of them sends a small check to the Harbor Project every year because she told me she wanted to give back to the place that gave her the beginning. She mailed a note with the first check that said, "You gave me the language. I'm passing it on." I read that note more than once. That is what the work is. Not the ceremony, not the check, not the number that made my family stand up in a library in Millhaven. The work is the Tuesday evenings, the borrowed basements, the book grant applications, the city council appearances, the 6 weeks of not speaking to my mother, and then calling her back because the silence was not useful and neither of us had forever. The work is Dorothy Reese's fountain pen on the proposal draft, and the red marks in the margins, and the Friday morning calls at 7:30, when she said things to me that were true and that I needed. I want to say something about the word embarrassing, the word my mother used at my kitchen table, because I have thought about it for 3 years, and I understand it now differently than I did when she said it. She was not wrong exactly, that the Harbor Project was embarrassing not for me, but for the story she had told about our family. She had built a picture of 2 daughters who had done respectable things in respectable ways, and I was the one whose respectable thing did not look respectable from the outside in the early years. I was the one with the stipend, and the second-hand car, and the church basement, and the slowly growing list of children that no one at the club could evaluate quickly. I complicated the picture. What I understand now is that the picture was always wrong. The thing I was building was real from the beginning. It was small and real, and small and real does not fit into a 30-second explanation at a dinner party, and that was the actual source of her embarrassment. Not that I was failing, that I was doing something she could not easily translate. That is a different problem than the one she named. And it is, finally, not my problem to solve. Family is not always the people you grow up with. It is sometimes a retired second-grade teacher with a bag of reading supplies who sits down at a folding table and begins working with a child without asking permission. It is the person who looks at what you are building and says, "Not yet, but it will be," and means it, and comes back the following Thursday and the Thursday after that. I am grateful for what my family has become in the year since the ceremony. I am realistic about what it cost to get there, and what I paid, and what I cannot get back. I am also 36 years old, and I have learned that gratitude and grief can live in the same house, and that this is not a contradiction. It is simply what it is to love people who needed to see before they could believe. I also understand now that the 6 weeks of silence after my mother came to my kitchen, the 6 weeks when I did not call, and she did not call, and we were both living with the shape of what had been said, were not wasted. They were the period in which I made a decision I had been circling for years, which was this: I was not going to keep trying to be legible to people who had decided not to look closely. I was going to build the thing and let the thing speak. The thing spoke. It spoke at a library ceremony on a Tuesday afternoon in Millhaven, with 200 people, and a ceremonial check, and my name in the upper left corner. It spoke in the voice of 847 children learning to read, and in the 7 retired teachers who came back Thursday after Thursday for 12 years, and in the 512 children served last year, and in the 12,000 projected over the next decade. It spoke without raising a voice or staging a confrontation or proving anything to anyone. It simply became what it had always been working to become, and then it stood there, plain and specific and documented. I did not need to argue my case. The notebook did it for me. The children did it. The work did what good work does in the end. It outlasted the doubt. The Harbor Project serves 847 children this year. Next year it will be more. In 10 years, with this grant, it will be 12,000 children in 4 Ohio counties who have access to literacy support they would not otherwise have, because 14 years ago a woman sat in a church basement with a blue notebook and $43 and did not stop when someone told her to. I look at the notebook on the mornings when things are difficult, which still happen, because the work is not finished and never quite will be, and I read the first names in the first column, and I remember that every large thing was once a small thing that someone kept going. Dorothy came to the office the morning after the ceremony. She brought coffee and 2 muffins, and she sat across from me, and we did not say anything for a while, the way you can be quiet with someone who has been with you for 12 years and does not need the silence filled. The office was quiet. Outside, Main Street was going on with its Tuesday morning. Then she said, "What's next?" I opened the notebook to a fresh page. I said, 12 counties by year 20. She said, "Write it down." I wrote it down. She picked up her coffee. She looked at the list on the wall. 847 names in 14 columns, 1 for each year, each name a Thursday evening that someone had shown up for. She said, "That's going to need a bigger wall." I said, "We'll build a bigger wall." She smiled. The way she smiles when the outcome is already clear to her. It has always been clear to her. I went back to work. That's my story. A folding table in a church basement. A blue notebook that started with $43 and 7 children's names. And a word, embarrassing, that turned out to describe the distance between someone's picture and the thing that was actually there. If you're in the early years of something real, and the people around you are calling it small, keep the notebook. Every entry matters. The numbers add up. If someone believed in you before the room did, go tell them today. They deserve to hear it from you directly, before a ceremony says it for them in a room full of strangers. Leave a comment below. Share this with someone who truly needs to know that the beginning is supposed to be small, and that small and real is not the same as failing. Drop a subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.